So I'm really fascinated about you as a producer. There's a few different angles I want to look at this from. The first is that I'm really interested in the range of quality of things you've put out on acoustic disc, because and not even just acoustic disc, but your career in general. Because, like, for example, acoustic just put out a record of you and Frank Wakefield playing, where I believe it's you on guitar, if I'm not mistaken, correct? And so it's you on guitar, and Frank is playing mandolin. And what's really interesting is those records are kind of almost like bedroom recording, single mic kind of a thing. Whereas you've also done, on the flip side, the one of the things that kind of blew me away about, especially that first David Grisman quintet record, is just how well it's recorded and mixed. And, like, even for 2025, it's such a crisp, clear record. And so my question kind of revolves around, as a producer, how do you feel? How do you think about recording quality, and how does it affect the power and the style and the composition of the music that you make and put out?
Well, I mean, I love good sounding records, and I love great music, and sometimes you have the ability to have both. I mean, that first quintet record, I had met a man named Bill Wolf, who was a great recording engineer, and we became friends. And you know, I you know, uh, recorded music is the music and the sound too, and that's always they've been equally important to me. But if given the choice, I'll always go with the music. In other words, like when I first fell in love with bluegrass music, I had the funky radio in my basement, and every Saturday night I was able to tune in Wheeling, West Virginia, the Wheeling Jamboree, and hear people like Jimmy Martin and the Osborne brothers. And of course, there'd be a lot of static and noise. But I had, my mom gave me a tape recorder early on, and I had this Wallensack tape machine. And I just put the microphone next to this radio and record this stuff. And it was, fidelity wise, it was terrible, but it was great music, and that's, I'd rather hear great music than, a great recording of bad music, so, but, when I got involved with making records and playing on people's records, and I just paid attention, and, how engineers recorded music, and when I heard something I liked, I put it in the remember this file, and so when it came time to when I had formed my first quintet, and fortunately Tony Rice, he was playing in the world's greatest bluegrass band in 1975, J.D. Crowe and the New South. It had Ricky Skaggs, Jerry Douglas. I mean, these were kids playing with J.D. Crowe, who had been Jimmy Martin's banjo player, great banjo player. And we both got hired by my friend Bill Keith, the banjo player, to play on his first album. I had never met Tony Rice, and I played him the tape of the music I was writing. I had, I mean, this is, when I was trying to learn to play the mandolin, I noticed that all my heroes wrote tunes. So I deliberately wrote my first tune, and then they just started happening. And so I kind of became a composer. I just had a list of tunes, and but by that time it had developed into a band that I had with a violin player Richard Green called the Great American Music Band. And we at one point decided that to try to make a go of playing instrumental music with bluegrass instruments, because neither one of us was much of a singer. And we just were curious to see if that could go over. And lo and behold, it did. And then Richard Green got an offer to go with Loggins and Messina, and I was left with a bunch of tunes and a concept. And but I had a tape of this band, and I played it for Tony Rice, and he said I'd give my left, can't say that because it's sort of a swear word, to play that music. And he made me go back to Lexington, Kentucky with him and start teaching him my tunes. And one day, it ultimately came out, and I had some young kids that were coming by my house on a regular basis to play these tunes and play these arrangements that I had developed. And Tony Rice came out for a couple of days. Then he went to Japan with J.D. Crowe in the New South. And in the middle of the night, one night, he called me up and told me he just gave J.D. his notice and he was going to move to California to play my music. I mean, you can't. So I had to do it, you know. I mean, I had this monster musician, you know, ready to change his life to play dog music, you know. So I kind of, there it was, so we did it.
That's awesome. And I mean, what a find. I mean, my God.
Yeah. But I never asked him to leave JD, you know. I didn't, you know. He volunteered. I mean, so, you know, I never really decided to have a band, but, you know, years ago, John Hartford told me, you're going to have a band. You know, I just didn't have that in because it just, I mean, most of the bands that I were in, it was in bluegrass, and there was always singing was a big part of it. And, you know, I learned to sing baritone, and, you know, I don't consider myself a singer, but I like singing parts, and I love bluegrass music, but I just couldn't really conceive of having a band essentially with bluegrass instruments playing instrumental music, but we did it.
Again, like that especially that first David Grisman quintet record is just so amazing for the level of talent, and I want to dive into that particularly. And the thing I think that's so amazing to me is, you know, I'm your typical rock blues guy. I did get into jazz, and I do love jazz. And I've recently, just because of you, honest to God, started falling into bluegrass and these other more traditional forms of American music. And what I'm really curious about is, you know, again, like I've played music my whole life, but I'm really interested in the music dynamic of bluegrass. And particularly, I'm really interested in like rehearsals. And I think because it's like, how do you put together, like, I guess like the communication, like how do you figure out like who plays what? How do you play it? Is it just, I mean, because when it comes off that first record, it just sounds so natural. It does feel like you just showed up and boom, this music came out. And I know that's not true because I know how music works.
We did a lot of rehearsing. Tony Rice moved into my basement, and by that time I had Todd Phillips had come to me early before that. He showed up in a mandolin class that I was teaching, and he had been a bass player. He was a bass player, but he was interested in mandolin playing, and he was kind of my ace student. And I quit teaching at this particular school. And but I invited Todd to come up to my house, and I was pretty much done teaching him. I mean, he was a natural, and so I had this concept of two mandolins, which is a very old concept. Vivaldi may have been the first, but I liked the role of the mandolin in a bluegrass band, what they call the chop. The mandolin player's kind of like the drummer. Well, everybody has to keep time, but the mandolin supplies the backbeat in a bluegrass
like the
band.
boom check, like the
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
The two and the four.
Yep.
And the chop is like a kind of certain chords that you release the left hand almost as soon as you play the chord, so it doesn't ring. It just it's like a drum with pitches, And in any case, I was in some bands where, I loved keeping that time, and that's something that I observed Bill Monroe. He was the master of that, and how crucial that was, and it was fun. And but whenever I play a solo, that would drop out. I kind of had this idea. Well, I wanted a mandolin chop behind me while I was playing a solo. And then I also, had heard, like, the first time Ralph Rinzler called me up one summer day in 1961 and said, "I'm driving down to Maryland to hear Bill Monroe. Want to come?" And so, of course, I did. And this guy, Frank Wakefield, was in the other band, the opening act. And he was about as close to Bill Monroe as Bill Monroe, And I got the mistaken impression that they all sounded like this, whereas I was hearing the two best, really, examples of Monroe-style mandolin at the time, And I heard them backstage, which was a tiny little backstage, playing duets in harmony, and that stuck with me. So I had the idea of a band with two mandolins, and Todd Phillips was he was the perfect guy because he kept showing up. And then one day he brought over his friend Darrell Anger, who'd been a fan of the Great American Music Band, and he had learned all the tunes and solos off some bootleg tapes of that. And the bass player was an older jazz guy who had been in the Great American Music Band, Joe Carroll. And they just used to come and we'd work on these tunes. And then I as soon as I had this vehicle of an instrumental band with the Great American Music Band, I started just writing tunes. It was like necessity was the mother of invention. I had a vehicle, I had an outlet. So, and I started writing tunes that weren't bluegrass at all, but they just, came out. And I guess I kind of figured out what to do with them. And then Tony Rice showed up and kind of completed the thing. And these guys they wanted to play every day. And we did. And we'd work on things. I mean, one thing, when I went back to Lexington with Tony Rice, he was playing bluegrass in the Sheraton Inn every night, largely for nobody. It was really sad. It's like the world's greatest bluegrass band. During the week, there was hardly anybody there. And by the second or third set, these guys would they'd start kind of parodying them. It was just kind of a bummer to watch these great bluegrass musicians with nobody in this lounge in the Sheraton Inn playing for 7 people. But during the day, I realized Tony Rice was like listening to Oscar Peterson and John Coltrane. That's really where and I could see that my music, what I was writing, was kind of a bridge between bluegrass and jazz. And that's what he wanted. And that's what I wanted. And that's what all these young pickers in 1975, it was ready to move into something different for those instruments. And we were all pioneers. Sam Bush, and he had the Newgrass. We were all kind of in that same milieu of expanding the bluegrass repertoire to a point where it wasn't even bluegrass. But and when I started the band, I had in my rider in the contract, you can't mention the word bluegrass in advertising this, because first of all, we didn't sing, and Tony Rice was a great singer, but he just wanted to play this music. I didn't twist his arm at all. That's what he wanted to do. But I didn't want people to think they were going to come hear bluegrass, because it wasn't, but they loved it.